Hello friends, welcome to today's lesson. In today's lesson, we'll be learning about quadratic equations. If you are new to this channel, please like, subscribe, press the bell icon so you can be notified automatically whenever a new video is released. In order to understand quadratic equations, you'll have to first understand the definition of a quadratic equation. A quadratic equation is a mathematical expression which takes the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0. A simple example of quadratic equation is x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals to 0. In the case of our example here, our a, which is the coefficient of x squared, is the invisible one which is beside x squared, and our b is 5, c is 6. In quadratic equations, a, b, and c are numerals. Numerals simply means numbers. And the highest power of x is 2. Also, the power of x is a positive whole number. What this simply means is that for an equation to be a quadratic equation, the highest power of the variable, which is x in our case here, must be 2. Any equation that has a power that is more than 2, let's say 3 and above, is no longer a quadratic equation but what we refer to as a polynomial. And the power of x must be a positive number. In other words, you cannot have x raised to power a negative number. Alright, moving forward. There are 4 methods you could use in solving quadratic equations. Sometimes you are at liberty to use any of the method, while at some other time the method to use is stated. This simply means that you need to understand how to solve quadratic equation using the 4 methods available. The reason is because sometimes you are at liberty, you are free to use any of the methods to solve when you are not told to use a particular method, while at some other time you will be asked to use a specific method. This is the reason why you should understand how to solve quadratic equation with all the available methods. So the methods are factorization method, formula method, completing the square method, and graphical method. So we'll start by taking a look at factorization method. Given the general form of a quadratic equation, which is ax squared plus bx plus c equals to 0, the first step you'll have to take in order to use factorization method is to multiply a and c. That's multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is a, and c, which is a constant. After multiplying the numbers, you'll have to think of 2 numbers. Step 2 is to think of 2 numbers that can multiply to give whatever you have gotten in step 1, which is a times c, and would add up to give the value of b. Step 3 is to replace b with the 2 numbers and factorize the equation. Step 4 is to equate the factors to 0 and solve the variable. These steps might appear abstract, but immediately we start solving some examples now, you find out that the steps are very easy. So let's start by taking some examples. In the end, you would have 2 values of variable for the variables. These values are also referred to as the roots of the equation. Okay, as an example, let's solve this equation. X squared plus 5x plus 6 equals to 0. The first step is to multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is 1, and the constant, which is 6. So by multiplying 1 and 6, we would have 6 as our answer. So step 2 is to find 2 numbers such that when you multiply them, you would have 6. You would have this 6 which you have gotten. And when you add them, you would have the coefficient of x, which is plus 5 in this case. Remember, we said earlier that when you add the product of a and c, you should have b. In other words, when you multiply 1 and 6, you will have a 6. So you look for 2 numbers so that when you multiply, you will have this 6. And when you add those 2 numbers, you will have 5 as your answer. So the next step is to go to our rough book and think of some numbers. So we'll be moving to our rough book now. So the next steps we'll be taking are inside our rough book and not in our solution. So you do the following in your rough book. So what are the numbers you can multiply to get 6? Think of them. We can decide to try 1 and 6. So let's multiply them and see what will happen. When we multiply 1 and 6, we'll have a 6. So it has passed the first criteria. The first criteria is that when we multiply those two numbers, we should have a 6. And when we add them, we should have a what? 5. So 1 times 6 has passed the first criteria. We have gotten 6 as our answer. So we'll have to test these two numbers, which are 1 and 6, to see whether they will pass the second criteria of giving us a 5. Now let's add them. When you add 1 and 6, it will give you 7. So it has failed the second criteria, which says that it should give us 5, which is our coefficient of b. So 1 and 6 are not the numbers we need. So let's try another set of numbers. Let's try 2 and 3. Let's multiply them and see what will happen. When you multiply 2 and 3, you will have a 6. It has passed the first criteria. The second criteria is that when you add them, you must have a 5. So let's add them and see. When you add 2 and 3, you have a 5. It has passed the second criteria. So we can see that 2 and 3 have passed the first criteria and the second criteria. This is how you think and come up with the numbers that meet the two criteria which we are interested in. So 2 and 3 passed the two criteria. They are the numbers we need. Let's go to our notes now. In other words, let's go back to our notes where we are solving. Remember, all what we have done here are our thought process. These are our thought process in our rough book. Now let's go back to our main notes. So moving back to our main notes, the next step is to replace the coefficient of x with 5. The next step is to replace the coefficient of x, which is 5 in this case, with the two numbers which we have gotten. Remember that our equation was x squared plus 5x plus 6 equals to 0, right? We multiplied 1 and 6, we got a 6, and we looked for two numbers that when you multiply, you have a 6. When you add, you have a 5. We have gotten our two numbers. The next step is to replace this 5x with those two numbers. So we can decide to rewrite this equation as x squared plus 2x plus 3x plus 6 equals to 0. Remember that our numbers are 2 and 3. And we have just replaced 5x with 2x plus 3x. That's because we know that 2x plus 3x will give us 5x. In other words, this equation and this equation are still the same. Remember that the next step is to factorize. To factorize simply means you should look at two things and bring out what is common between them. If we look at these two terms here, x squared and 2x, we will realize that what is common between them is x. So we can bring out x. When we bring out x from x squared, what will be left with x? And we'll bring out x from 2x, will be left with 2. When we look at 3x and 6, what is common between them is 3. It simply means that 3 can divide 3x and 3 can also divide 6. So we'll bring out 3. When we bring out 3 from 3x, we'll be left with x, plus when we bring out 3 from 6, not subtraction now, division, we'll have a 2 remaining. So by the time we factorize the expression, we'll have x into bracket x plus 2 plus 3 into bracket x plus 2. Now let me explain how we got here again. Remember, we are factorizing, which simply means we are considering these two and bringing out what is common between them. Looking at x squared and 2x, what is common between them, or what can divide through the two of them without having the remainder, is x. That's the reason why we have brought out x. Now, when you bring out x from x squared, when you divide x squared by x, you will be left with x. When you divide 2x by x, you'll be left with 2. That's the reason why we have x plus 2 here. Now, looking at 3x plus 6, we realize that the number that can divide 3x and divide 6 without remainder is 3. That's the reason why we have brought out 3. When 3 divides 3x, we'll be left with x. And when 3 divides 6, we'll be left with 2. That's the reason why we now have 3 into bracket x plus 2 equals to 0. All right. Now, you would have noticed that the expression we have in the bracket here and the expression we have in the bracket here, they are now the same. This is how factorization method works. When you get to this stage and you realize that the two brackets you have are not having the same content, it simply means you have made a mistake somewhere. So you'll have to retract and go back to your steps, the steps you've already taken. All right. So on getting to this stage, now that we have seen that these two contents are the same, we'll just pick one of them. We'll pick one of them, and we'll end up taking x plus 3x as our second factor. So I've taken one of the x plus 2x, I've picked one of them, and I've taken x plus 3 as my second factor. Remember that the next step is to equate each of these factors to 0. When you equate x plus 2 equals to 0, you have to introduce an OR word. In other words, it's either this is equal to 0 or this is equal to 0. You might want to just know this step for the way it is. However, if you really want to understand why we are equating this to 0, take for instance, you have a times b equals to 0. For a times b to be equals to 0, it simply means that it is either a that is 0 or b that is 0. That's the concept that brought about this step here. Now that we have seen that x plus 2 is equal to 0 or x plus 3 equals to 0, we will have to solve for x in each of these cases. So x plus 2 equals to 0 or x plus 3 equals to 0. From here, in order to get x, we'll have to collect like terms. 0 is a number, so we'll have to move plus 2 to the right-hand side. So we'll now have 0 minus 2. X is a number, plus 3 is a number, 0 is a number. We'll have to move plus 3 to the right-hand side to have 0 minus 3. That's the reason why we now have x equals to 0 minus 2 or x equals to 0 minus 3. So 0 minus 2 is minus 2 and 0 minus 3 is minus 3. So our x is equals to minus 2 or minus 3. This is the peculiar thing about quadratic equations. You must have x or any other variable you are dealing with as two answers. You must have two answers at the end of a quadratic equation. These are also called the roots of the equation we have just solved for. Sometimes you might be asked to solve the equation. Sometimes you might be asked to find the roots of the equation. So whichever way the question is given to you, it's still telling you to take the same steps. All right. Now let's take a look at another example. In this example that we'll be solving, we will not go into details of writing out our steps. We will just solve it the way we are supposed to solve, so that we'll have a clear understanding of how the solving should go from beginning to end without breaks. All right. So the first step is to multiply the coefficient of x squared, which is 3, and 6. So when you multiply 3 and 6, you'll have 18. Remember, now that you have gotten 18, you are looking for two numbers such that when you multiply them, you will have 18, and when you add them, you will have minus 11. Okay? So the two numbers are minus 9 and minus 2. So now that we've realized that the two numbers are minus 9 and minus 2, we'll replace this minus 11x with minus 9x and minus 2x. Now you realize that when you work out minus 9x and minus 2x, it will give you minus 11x. It therefore means that this equation and this original equation are still the same. What's the next step? The next step is to factorize these two and also factorize these two. To factorize simply means you should find out what you can bring out from these two such that you will still maintain what you can bring out from these two that can still divide this first one and this second one. So if we look at this 3x squared and 9x, we realize that 3 can divide 3x squared and 3 can also divide 9x. We bring out 3. We realize that x can divide 3x squared and x can divide 9x. Simply means the factor here is 3x. Now looking at minus 2x and 6, we realize that 2 can divide 2x and divide 6. So 2 is the factor we have to bring out here. So we are bringing out 3x here. When we factorize the expression, we'll find out that 3x is common here. When 3x divide 3x squared, we'll be left with x. When 3x divide 9x, we'll be left with 3. The minus sign remains the minus sign here, okay? Now, you realize that between 2x and 6, 2 is a common factor. When you bring out 2, when 2 divides 2x, you'll be left with x. When 2 divides 6, you'll be left with 3. Now, there is an important thing I would like you to take note of. Don't be tempted to write this plus sign here. The reason is because we have a minus sign at the beginning of this bracket. Remember, if you write a plus sign here, By the time this minus sign opens up this bracket, you will be having a minus sign here, which was not the original sign in the original equation. So, but by the time you put a minus sign here, by the time you use minus 2 to multiply this bracket, you will have plus, which was the original sign in the original equation. Then another way, in case you are having issues with your sign and you are not very sure, take a look at this first expression you have gotten. You realize that it is x minus 3 and not x plus 3. That could also be a guide for you to know the sign to write here. But in any case, thinking about it mathematics wise, you realize that minus sign is the right sign to put here. Alright, moving further. We've already established that now that you've gotten to this stage, that you've gotten the two brackets as being equal, all you need to do is to pick one of them and you write 3x minus 2 as the other bracket. So we have picked one of them, which is x minus 3, and we have written 3x minus 2 as the other factor. So the next step is to equate each of the factors to 0 and solve for x or any other variable you are given. So from here now, minus 3 will cross over, it will become 0 plus 3, and from here, minus 2 will cross over, it will become 0 plus 2. Alright, we now have x equals to 0 plus 3 or 3x equals to 0 plus 2. We've gotten x. Alright, by the time we add 0 plus 3, we have x. However, on this other side, we still have 3x equals to 2. So in order for us to get x, in this case, we'll have to divide both sides by the coefficient of x, which is 3. So x is equals to 3 here, and x is equals to 2 over 3 here. So these are the roots of the equation, and this is also the solution of this quadratic equation we have here. We are done. So this is how you should solve a quadratic equation using factorization method without having a lot of write-ups like the steps you need to take, like the previous example. The reason why I had to write down those steps is just for you to have an understanding of what to do at each point in time. Now let's take a look at another example. We now have 2x squared minus 7x plus 3 equals to 0. The steps remain the same in that you will start by multiplying the coefficient of x squared, which is 2 in this case, and c. When you multiply 2 and 3, we'll have a 6. So we'll have to go to our rough book, think of two numbers such that when you multiply them, you'll have a 6, and when you add them, you have minus 7. So thinking of these two numbers are minus 6 and minus 1. The next step is to replace b, which is minus 7, with these two numbers we have gotten. So we now have 2x squared minus 6x minus x plus 3 equals to 0. Minus 6x and minus x would give us minus 7x. That is what makes this whole equation the same as this equation here. The next step is to factorize these two and factorize these two. Alright, so the next step is to factorize this equation that we already have here. Looking at 2x squared and 6x, we will find out that 2 can divide here, 2 can divide here, x can divide here, x can divide here. So our common factor in this case is 2x. And looking at minus x plus 3, we can also take 1 as our common factor that can divide x and 3. So factorizing this expression, we'll have 2x into bracket x minus 3 minus 1, which is the common factor in x and 3. So whenever you get to a stage like this and you're not sure of what the factor could be here, you could also take 1 as your factor. So we realize that when 2x goes into 2x squared, we'll have an x. When 2x goes into 6x, we'll have a 3. When 1 goes into x, we'll have an x. When 1 goes into 3, we'll have a 3. Take note of the minus sign here. That's because when you use minus 1 to open up this bracket, you should have a plus here. But when you put a plus here, you will have a minus here, which was not the original equation. So you also realize that you have x minus 3 here. You also have x minus 3 here. Alright. So since these two contents are the same, you can pick 1 as one of the factors, and you also take 2x minus 1 as your other factor. So we now have x minus 3 and what? 2x minus 1 equals to 0 as our factors. So the next step is to equate each of these factors equals to 0. So we now have x minus 3 equals to 0 or 2x minus 1 equals to 0. By the time we solve for x, In both cases, we find out x is equal to 0 plus 3 and 3x is equal to 0 plus 1. So x is equal to 3 or 3x equals to 1. So in order to make x free here, we divide both sides by 3. So we will end up having x equals to 3 or x equals to 1 over 3. So these are the roots of the equation, or these are the solutions of this quadratic equation. Alright, we have just learned factorization method. In our next class, we will learn other methods, which are formula method, completing the square method, graphical method. Alright, so these are some exercises for you to try. You can solve the following. Write your answers in the comment section. If there is any part of this tutorial you don't understand, feel free to comment in the comment section. And if there is any other topic you would like me to make a tutorial on, let me know in the comment section. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and press the bell icon to be notified automatically for new videos. Thank you for listening. Till we meet again.